have co-authors or maybe several authors, but Daniel 4 is fitting right in there. There are two different authors that we know of in Daniel 2. Of course, Daniel, and now we have Nebuchadnezzar. He wrote Daniel 4. Now, I had forgotten, didn't remember, or never did know until just several years ago that Nebuchadnezzar wrote it. I mean, I studied the book of Daniel in college, and just never struck me that Nebuchadnezzar had written the book. And of course, what's the best kind of witness anybody can have? Your personal testimony, right? So we're going to have a personal testimony from Nebuchadnezzar. Now, I don't really like reading word for word, but this is going to be our Bible reading today, and we'll interrupt, or I'll interrupt myself at various points with some comments, and hope that it will be useful, that there'll be a lesson for us today. So let's get started. We're not going to go to verse 1 or 2 or 3. Let's start in Daniel 4:4. Daniel 4:4. In my Bible, it has a subheading, Nebuchadnezzar has another dream. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in mine house and flourishing in my palace. And taking it easy. Isn't that nice? In his palace. I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts upon my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. Therefore I made a decree to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. Then came in the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. And I told them the dream before them, but they did not make known to me the interpretation thereof. Whether they couldn't interpret it at all, or they gave an interpretation that he didn't think was right or fit, it could be decided either way. Now Daniel was, and his three friends are said to have been of the Chaldeans. And again, it just so happened that Daniel wasn't there. Now, this chapter takes place probably near the end of Nebuchadnezzar's rule. He ruled for 43 years, and scholars believe that this is closer to the end, at least 7 or 8 years before the end, as we'll find out. So Daniel, he might have retired by now, who knows? He was probably up in his 60s, and don't know if they had retirement back then. Never know. So we don't know where he was or what he was even doing in the government. But at last, Daniel came in before me, whose name was Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God, and in whom is the Spirit of the Holy. Now, in the name of my God, that's a little aside there. Now he's talking about Daniel. Daniel, in whom is the Spirit of the holy gods. And before him I told the dream, saying, O Belteshazzar, master of the magicians, because I know that the Spirit of the holy God is in thee, and no secret troubleth thee. He had full confidence that from, of course, his first dream, and Daniel had told him that, and he knew that he had the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit in him. He was confident that Daniel was going to be able to tell him what the interpretation of his dream was. And now we go into what the dream is. Here's what he told Daniel. Thus were the visions of mine head in my bed. I saw, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof was great. The tree grew and was strong, and the height thereof reached into the heaven, and the sight thereof to the end of all the earth. Huge tree. The leaves thereof were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all the beasts, for all the beasts of the field had shadow under it. Fowls of heaven dwelt in the boughs thereof, and all flesh was fed of it. I saw in visions my head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher and a holy one came down from heaven. He cried out and said thus, hew down the tree, and cut off its branches, and shake off its leaves, and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts get away from under it, and the fowls from its branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump of his roots in the earth, even with the band of iron and brass in the tender grass of the field. Now, have you ever seen a stump with growth on it? Have you ever seen that? I've seen that. Have you ever seen it where the tree's been cut down, yet it's got more branches still going? So it might have been cut down, but was it necessarily dead? No. In the tenderness of the grass field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from a man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, and let 7 times pass over him. Now, according to the Bible, what would be 7 times? 7 years? It's a long time, isn't it? This matter is by the decree of the watchers, and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men. All right, I'm going to stop here again. He's had a vision, and it's been decreed that this is going to happen, so the living may know that God rules in the kingdom of men, and he has the ability to give it to whomever he wants, and sets up and takes down whoever he wants. This would be referring to God. Now, I looked up the word basest. If something is base in our language today, is it very good? If someone has a base character, is that a positive thing? No. But in looking up the word base and the way it's used there, it means humble. So now we're getting the start here of the message of what's happening with Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, lowliest or the humble. So God will set up whom he will and take down who he will. And if he takes them down, he's going to replace them with someone that is humble. So we're getting the idea of the problem going here. This dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. So he remembers this dream. That's another thing that's probably different than the first dream. He remembers it and pretty much quoting it word for word, I guess. Now thou, O Belshazzar, declare the interpretation thereof. For as much as all the wise men of my kingdom, he's sitting there thinking about it. Nebuchadnezzar's watching him, and he can tell by the look on Daniel's face, it's probably not good. And so it says, and his thoughts troubled him. So he was being troubled, and the king could see it. So the king spake and said, Belteshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation thereof trouble thee. He says, tell me what it is. Belteshazzar answered and said, my Lord, the dream be to them that hate thee, and the interpretation thereof to thine enemies. Now, Daniel knows it's about Nebuchadnezzar, but he says, I'm hoping, and I wish, and I'm hoping again that the meaning of this dream will be for your enemies, not for you. Again, now this is an idea that Nebuchadnezzar says, uh-oh, what is it? So with that in mind, I'm sure he's going to listen very, very closely. The tree that thou sawest, which grew and was strong, whose height reached into the heaven, and the sight thereof to all the earth, whose leaves were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, upon whose branches the fowls of the heaven had their habitation. It is thou, O king. So the tree represented Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, great king at this time, huge empire. Tree was big, showing his empire was big. He had a lot of people that depended on his decisions and what he said. And evidently, we get the idea from reading that Nebuchadnezzar was probably a fairly just and good king. And the birds came, and animals found shelter and underneath, so he was providing for his kingdom. It is thou, O king, that art grown and become strong, for thy greatness is grown and reacheth into heaven. And whereas the king saw a watcher and holy one come down from heaven, and saying, hew the tree down and destroy it, yet leave the stump of the roots thereof in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass, in the tenderness of the grass field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts of the field, till 7 times passes over him. Now that's not so good. The kingdom is going to fall, or in this case, Nebuchadnezzar is going to fall, and his portion is going to be with the beasts of the field for 7 years. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, coming right from God, which is come upon my Lord the king, that they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and they shall wet thee with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over thee, till thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. So why is he going to fall? Why is he going to be like a beast in the field? Till he knows that God is over everything. 26 and 7, we'll read those now. And whereas they commanded to leave the stump of the tree roots, thy kingdom shall be sure unto thee. After that thou shalt have known that the heavens do rule. Wherefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable unto thee, and break off thy sins by righteousness, and thine iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. If it may be a lengthening of thy tranquility. Now he's been told he's going to have 7 years of being like a beast, but he's also been assured that when he acknowledges God, he will get his kingdom back and his rulership. But Daniel gives him a little counsel over and above that. Change your ways, and maybe this won't happen to you. Change your ways. Stop doing sins and show mercy to the poor, and maybe it'll go away. Okay, we go fast forward now. All this came upon the king. Nebuchadnezzar, at the end of 12 months in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. King is out there walking around looking from his palace. It's been 1 year. Time seems to make things dim, right? You forget things. They aren't as easy to remember. And 1 year's passed since he's had this dream and been given to counsel, and he may have forgotten a little bit about it, especially when he was there in his palace there. At the end of 12 months, he walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. The king spake and said, Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power, for the honor of my majesty? Now we're going to take out a little time. We have some pictures coming up here. And go to extra biblical sources here. We've had some archaeologists go and excavate Babylon, and they've done some things that found some things. Babylon was either rebuilt or built completely by Nebuchadnezzar. It's been around since many, many, many years. Ancient Babylon. This is not necessarily the ancient Babylon. It was comprised of the original inner city. He added what was known as the new city, and then an outer city. And of course, the Euphrates River flowed right through part of the city. And there were two major attractions or wonderful things in Babylon, the city of Babylon. One of them, as you know, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world was the Hanging Gardens. According to history, he had that built for his Median wife. He had a wife from the Medes, which we'll hear about in another chapter. And I guess around Babylon it was a little drier, not too many trees, and not quite as nice. And he had these built so she could remember her home and what it looked like there. This was built near the southern palace of the inner city. So that may have been the palace he was at. He had 3 different palaces within the borders of his city. And that was it. So we got an artist rendition of that. Let's go to the next one. This is something that is still around. You can find what was known as the Ishtar Gate, which has been taken to Berlin. Has anybody been to Germany and seen the Ishtar Gate in the museum in Berlin? It's there. I don't know if they repainted it, but that was what he could see, what he had built. It was a double gate, very colorful. It had bulls and mythical beasts on it. And in the entryways or the gates leading up to this particular gate, the walls leading up to this particular gate, there were lions on there. And it was very beautiful. But these were the things that he was looking from his palace and he was seeing. He was seeing these hanging gardens. He saw all this beauty and color that was there. In fact, history tells us, and I'm going to read a quote of his attributed to him here in a second. It says, "Such was this colorful and mighty city that King Nebuchadnezzar had built, the marvel of all nations. His pride in it reflected in inscriptions he left to posterity." And here's one again. You can go to the Berlin Museum. You can see that, and you can read one of the things that he left, one of his inscriptions. Here's what it says. Here's the interpretation of it. "I have made Babylon, the holy city, the glory of the great gods, more prominent than before, and have promoted its rebuilding. I have caused the sanctuaries of gods and goddesses to lighten up like the day. No king among all kings has ever created, no earlier king has ever built what I have magnificently built for Marduk. I have furthered to the utmost the equipment of the Esagila and the renovation of Babylon more than had ever been done before. All my valuable works, the beautification of the sanctuaries of the great gods which I undertook, more than my royal ancestors, I wrote in a document and put it down for coming generations. He wants everybody to know what he's done. All my deeds which I have written in this document shall those read who know how to read and remember the glory of the great gods. May the way of my life be long. May I rejoice in offspring. May my offspring rule over the black-headed people to all eternity. And may the mention of my name be proclaimed for good at all future times. It's a lot of eyes, and eyes. But he does end up, I think it was kind of telling here, that he hopes that his name is mentioned for good. Do you think that's happened? When you think of Nebuchadnezzar, do you think pretty much good about him? I think so. So he's got some of that. But an awful lot of eyes have done this. I have done that. And all this magnificent things I have done. Well, let's continue. While the word was in the king's mouth, instantaneously, right after he says it, there fell a voice from heaven saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee. What he was told a year ago, it came true, just as it was decreed. And they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and shall make thee to eat grass as oxen. And 7 times shall pass over thee until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. My Bible says temporary insanity. He went mad. Now for 7 years he was like a beast in the fields. And obviously I do not know how God works, but evidently at the end of that 7 years, God was able to allow him to regain his sanity. Okay, and we'll touch on that here in a minute. The same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar. He was crazy. He was gone insane. And he was driven from men and did eat grass as oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird claws. He was not taken care of. He didn't have to take the bath and the showers. I guess the dew did that. Well, at the end of 7 years, I believe, maybe God allowed him to become sane again. And it said, at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes unto heaven, and my understanding returned unto me, and I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and he doth according to his will in the army of heaven among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say unto him, What dost thou? He praised God. He gave him the honor and the glory and said, he is the ultimate ruler. He's everlasting. His dominion is forever. Now, obviously, the Bible probably doesn't agree with me, because in verse 36, it says, At the same time my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom, mine honor and brightness returned unto me. And my counselors and my lords sought unto me, and I was established in my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added unto me. He got everything back. He became again the greatest, strongest ruler on earth. But he had a little bit different outlook. A little bit different outlook. Let's go to verses 1 through 3, and now we're going to see what Nebuchadnezzar did once he got back into his throne again. So let's go back to verses 1, 2, and 3. Nebuchadnezzar the king, unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth. He's sending this out to everybody in his kingdom and maybe some other places. Peace be multiplied unto you. I thought it good to show the signs and the wonders that the high God hath wrought toward me. How great are his signs and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. He wants everybody to know who God is, his strength, his sovereignty, and he's telling everybody. He's still in power, but he wants the people to know where he now gets his power and greatness. He wasn't afraid to let people know. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't self-diminished to let the whole world as he knew it know that God was the source of his power, his greatness, even his very life. That takes a good man to do that, doesn't it? Now, earlier we found out, it was a couple times that he told the people that they needed to worship the God of Daniel. They needed to worship the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So he's telling people they need to do that again. But is there a difference between this time and maybe the other several times? I believe he is convinced 100% that, yes, this is the God of all gods, and he gets his power and dominion and sovereignty from this God. All right, now we go to the very last verse. Go back to Daniel 4:37. And what is the lesson he learned? He tells us in verse 37. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth, and his ways judgment, and that those that walk in pride he is able to abase. He learned the lesson that he had been working in, and he'd been ruling in pride. It was all about him. And that was not acceptable. And he was so thankful that God took away his pride and made him a humble man. And gave him humility, not humiliation, but gave him humility. He was still a great man, still had great power, but now he knew the source of that, and he knew that he needed to be a humble king. Well, I believe the pastor wants us to see Christ in here and see what we can see about Christ in here, and we'll get to that in a second. But we have some lessons here, I think, that he learned. As we heard in the story, pride goeth before a fall. He was up, he fell. Insane. had no control over anything, like an animal, then he was raised back up. Of course, we've said this a couple times, but we'll say it again. From verse 17, God is the source of our lives. We get our life from him. He is our ruler, to be the ruler of our lives. And he takes down rulers and changes their lives. So he's going to change our lives if we're not ruling or allowing him to rule in our lives. Verse 30, where Nebuchadnezzar said, "Is not this great Babylon that I have built?" We need to remember, all we have is from God. It comes from God. Pride. We like to talk and tell people what we've done and what we've accomplished, but we got to remember that that's where sin got started, was at pride. As we always say, what's in the middle of pride? I is always in the middle of pride, and that's why we're here now, because of pride. Another lesson that we and Nebuchadnezzar learned is we need to praise God and give him the honor and glory, and then we need to share. Now, he told everybody. Everybody heard what happened to him. We need to share with everyone what God has done for us. Now, where do I see Jesus Christ in chapter 4? Well, actually, I would say that I see the antithesis, or the opposite of what Christ was like in Nebuchadnezzar before his change. It was all about him. I did this. Even his own words that he wrote, that he left for us to read today, that he wanted us to read. It was all about him. Where he was the most powerful. He was the most magnificent. Whereas Christ, when he was on this earth, knew where his power was from. How did he start every day? Prayer. He went to the power source. I guess we could say in these days he plugged in. He powered up each morning. And there he asked for his wisdom, direction, and power. There's also a prayer that he said, John 17, if you want to turn there. We're just going to read the first 7 verses. And we know that we know where, or in our case, who the power is that we get from every day. But let's read John 17, 1 through 7. These words spake Jesus, and lifted up his eyes to heaven, and said, Father, the hour is come. Glorify thy Son, that thy Son may also glorify thee. As thou hast given him power over all flesh, that he should give eternal life as many as thou hast given him. It says it right there. He says, you've given me the power. And this is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. I have glorified thee on earth. I have finished the work which thou gavest me. And now, O Father, glorify thou me with thine own self, with the glory which I had with thee before and the world was. I have manifested thy name unto the men which thou gavest me out of the world. Thine they were, and thou gavest me them, and they have kept thy word. Now they have known that all these things whatsoever thou hast given me are of thee. Everything we have, God has given to us. And that is where we see Christ in Daniel 4, is that he's the giver of all good things. He's the giver of life, what we have. And if we don't use it correctly, we may face, and some of us probably have faced, what Nebuchadnezzar faced, and it has been a humbling experience to us that we can't do it on our own. So again, we know where or who our power comes from, and we need to spend every day, just as Christ did, in prayer and praise for what God has done for us, even though we may not want to. Things may not always be as we want them, but we still need to give the honor and glory to God and let Him lead in our lives. It's Him, not us. It's not me. It's not I. Not I, but Christ. We sang that, and we want God to have His way in our lives.